Hi, today we're going to have an opportunity to speak with an old friend, and it's Dr. Gresham Bayne, who I first met when I looked at who was doing this 800 call doc down in San Diego. So, Gresh, I have a question to start this series, and I think you know more about the opportunity to bring medicine into the home than most people, and I know we're going there. So if we entitle this little conversation we're going to have, why you, Gresham Bayne, who created the oldest house cold practice in the United States, is currently doing what you're doing rather than having done what you've done. So good morning, and tell me about you quickly as an emergency room physician deciding that you could bring the emergency room to people's homes.
Well, good morning to you, Ron. The opportunity of sharing the passion I've had for 31 years now and entering patients' homes with the ability to practice good medicine is a real privilege for me. I think, propagating this through the internet is also just exciting as all get out. The ability for the public and the physician community to know what we've learned over the last 3 decades can, in fact, change healthcare by itself. We started, as you know, many years ago as an emergency physician, realizing 90% of the patients we take care of in our ERs, and that's 100 million encounters in the emergency room in the United States last year, can be seen in the home setting. And we have everything we need to do in the patient's home. We have portable lab instruments that we hold in our hands that run on batteries, and in 2 minutes give me all the blood tests we're used to seeing in the ER. We have portable X-ray. We have our intravenous lines and our clinical ability to do blood tests and sew up wounds and put casts on fractures and so forth. And that changes the paradigm, because the big thing I found out was patients love it, which wasn't a surprise, but what was a surprise is how inexpensive it was to do.
And so moving from when you started, and we'll have a description of what your emergency room on wheels looked like then, and bringing us forward to what an emergency room on wheels can look like now and how you prepare for that. Let's take a moment and describe, if you would, and maybe we can find an old picture of what your truck looked like and what was in it. So what was in it?
So, yeah, back in 1984, when the vision was, consuming my soul, there was no way to do portable handheld instrument testing. Portable X-rays were done, but they were all brought, but the cassette was with wet film processing, had to be brought back to a building because the chemicals were liquid and toxic and hazardous materials and so forth. So that led to me building these $300,000 vans in an Econoline E350 Ford, getting a Ford engineering certificate of safety and a DOT transportation permit, as you know, to carry toxic chemicals, and putting an X-ray processor in the back of the van, which had to be made a dark room, putting a gray water tank to hold the picric acid waste, and establish a silver reclamation program for the waste of the X-ray effluent. It required setting up some of the early tabletop lab machines in the van, which needs 110 volt power, and that turns out to be a big deal in itself, because nobody had really done this for the kind of medical equipment and computerized testing equipment that was then available. So we learned a lot and spent a lot of money making a lot of mistakes.
But what did that look like? Quick description. How big was it?
Yeah, it looked like an ambulance. It was the standard ambulance chassis. The E350 Ford is a well-known vehicle, especially the diesel, because it's the one vehicle you can part out any place in the world. I mean, you can be in Africa and get an engine block for this thing. And because the application of this internationally was, back then, we had envisioned things like the Kuwait invasion and the need to rebuild the entire healthcare system of Kuwait. And I was actually working with the Minister of Health in Bahrain for remote clinic applications back then. Um, so we wanted to get a single all-encompassing solution for the point of care, that when the physician wasn't the limiting factor, nothing else would be in terms of dispositive treatment at the scene.
So you just told me something about why you did this. You see, mountain climbers do it because there's a mountain to be climbed. But put it in your own words. Why did you leave the emergency room where you worked as an emergency room physician to do this?
Yeah, so it just seemed inordinately expensive to wade through 10 patients to find the one that needed me. And I had just finished being chairman of the world's largest emergency department for the military here in San Diego. And, you know, 400 or 500 patients a day beating our doors down, which back then was high volume, and with only one doctor on duty. People could suffer from that because there was no intact triage system to sort out who was truly emergent, who was urgent, meaning needed to be seen immediately, but not in, CPR circumstances. But then the vast majority of these patients then and today need information. When the American public gets sick or some acute new medical problem happens to them, they want information, not transportation. And what 911 gives them is transportation.
Fascinating you say that, because you worked in a place that you were trained to work in. And suddenly you have this aha moment, eureka. And you must have been, if not severely laughed at, thought you were out of your mind.
Well, actually, there were times when I thought I was out of my mind. That eureka moment, I'll tell you exactly when it was. The patient's name, and I have his permission and the family's permission his son actually built the first van. He was a World War II hero. His name was Captain Sigmund Babczynski. He sank the Shinano in World War II, the largest ship ever floated that Japan had built in secrecy. And he was the skipper of the Archerfish, a submarine diesel sub in World War II, and it fired that torpedo spread. Well, when you're a Navy-born, Navy brat, military man like me, these people are special and deserve everything we can do for them. So it seemed crazy. I was in my third year of a general surgery residency back in the mid-'70s, and he needed a cyst, an epidermal occlusion cyst, removed from his earlobe. And I thought, well, shoot, I'm not going to have this famous World War II hero and veteran come in and wait in my clinic, which I knew would take hours and stuff. So I stole a bunch of stuff from the Navy and went by his house and laid him out on the kitchen table and did what is pretty much a botched up surgical case. In taking these cysts out, you can't rupture them because they'll infect. And of course, I ruptured it. I didn't have good lighting. I didn't have the expectation that the table was not an operating table that I couldn't move and get close, and the usual technical problems that as you're learning by doing. But what the aha moment was, despite knowing when you break these cysts, instead of being able to sew up the man's ear, you are now dooming him to 1 to 3 months of wound packings and, a big red Goomba hanging from his face, and which is, kind of not the surgical result that you want. And yet he was the happiest patient I had ever seen in my brief young career at the time. And it occurred to me that was the key.
And looking back on it, and is the gentleman still alive, by the way?
No, he did pass away years later, after many, many events.
But they were good. That was a good story for you and he to remember. And I'm glad you added that in terms of patient satisfaction, the kinds of things we collect today as information, it was ranked very, very high.
Right. Well, we were doing, when we got started in the early years, we would send out a Likert scale, what they now know as a 5-star scale in managed care terms. And we never got anything back less than 4.9. I mean, and the averages were all 5.0, 5.0, 5.0. So we stopped doing surveys.
Right.
I mean, people are so grateful for a doctor taking the effort to bring the right equipment to their home and fixing their problem.
So if you don't mind, for today's purpose, in introducing you to a large part of the world that doesn't know anything about the story you've just told, move fast forward to what you envision doing today, which we'll save for another program, but just highlight what happens when a patient at home wants information and needs something done, and how you clarify in your own mind what it is you're about to do, besides giving him the information, making sure that someone coming into his home can handle it, rather than saying, hang up, go to the emergency room now.
So the first thing that you have to think about as a professional in the healthcare science is you've got to triage. You've got to use your decision tree and your skill sets to make sure you do not delay a 911 decision. You know, especially in the elderly, where the preponderance of our work has been in recent years, the patients over 80 years old are frequently confused or demented and stressed, and their caregivers are stressed. And so they may not be thinking straight. So there has to be a very discreet way with recoverable data, algorithm-based logic that is QA-able. You can put it through a quality assurance program of your peers and ask discrete questions and learn from that, because nobody's ever done this before, as to what it means when someone calls who's 90 years old and not able to give a full history over the phone, and their caregiver says, for the last 3 days, she just hasn't been herself. We've learned that that's life-threatening. And so you need to really address this front triage, so that true emergencies, you know, people with substernal crushing chest pain radiating down their left arm, you know, get sent to the heart attack center or the stroke center, and you don't delay that care. That's number one priority. And I think I may still be, because of my emergency medicine background and the fact that our whole specialty is built on what are called Clausen cards from Jeff Clausen up in Seattle Heart Watch. I think I may be the only one really that focused on that in the beginning.
You know, the interesting thing about that is today, you know, when a pilot gets into a private plane, he goes through a checklist.
Right.
When somebody gets into a big passenger plane, they go through a checklist. And you have gone through a checklist so often, and you, with other physicians like yourself, are very eager to kind of put this checklist out into those who wish to be trained to do what you and others have learned to do tomorrow, so that it's not a recipe for emergency care like a cooking recipe, but if you want to make sure that people have their pie work out well, why not follow a recipe, which is just a series of rules and a series of opportunities and a series of things to remember when you do this. And that's an education program that you've been involved with, training other physicians around the United States to do exactly what you once started doing and learned to do.
Yeah, and it's important to note that there are aspects of this that should be regimented and put into an algorithm for safety, patient safety standards, for instance. And, you know, we're quite proud in our program that in 330,000 plus house calls at Call Doctor, we've knocked on a dead man's door twice. Both times were logged in, explainable, and totally acceptable, with grateful patient families as a result of that. And no delay in critical care was appropriate at the time. But I think that's a record to be, that's a tough record. Not many people could claim that they even know how many times they have, for instance.
So going from where you went to, let's say, looking at accelerating house call movement in America, which will be the topic of the next episode in the life of Gresham Bayne, which continues. And then we'll go on to other episodes and other episodes. And the nice thing about learning from you what could be is that we could do this in a very, very structured fashion so that this in itself becomes distant learning opportunity for anybody who wants to follow your trajectory and move forward with you so that we can bring medicine into the real medical home, which is where the patient lives, because that's where the patient would prefer to be, to stay, to be assisted, rather than this medical home we've created in our industry where the patient always must come to us when we have something like we're using right now to see the patient. I see the doctor if I were your patient, and you could decide with proper instrumentation in my home that you suggested I have to care for me at my young age. Is that not so?
Yeah, I think we need to face up as physicians to the fact that our profession has missed the ball. You know, when the American College of Physicians, as reputable an organization as exists on the planet today, came out with their 32-page paper describing for the first time the patient-centered medical home, the word house call did not appear in it. So here we are 10 years later, and everybody's completely revamping the patient-centered medical home because it didn't work. And what originally they came out of the office-based practice with is what I think is really a dumb idea. And that is that you can treat a sick, unstable, confused patient in a family crisis over the phone. There is nothing less logical to me as a house call doctor than that. And it's also an axiom to that you can't replace the magic of that physician's license and the trust that the patient has in their doctor with oftentimes with other people. You know, in this world, we want to dumb things down or to put things have care given by the appropriate level of care, and I encourage that. And I'd be the first to say that the vast majority of the house calls our group has made over the years could have been and have been given by physician assistants and nurse practitioners, and they don't need a doctor, but they do need that doctor having seen that patient and in a direct trusting relationship with that patient, because when the crisis comes, it's going to be the doctor's comments or a subsequent visit that is going to be so valuable to both the patient and the healthcare system.
So this video blog that we're going to start with you is all about having our colleagues understand that there is a way to practice medicine virtually with people at home, as long as you have all of that which is needed by the patient, the caregiver, the medical person, be it a physician assistant or a nurse who's been trained to do what you and others have trained them to do, and with you and your colleagues in their presence. You can meet the patient, you can meet the family, you know the nurse practitioner or physician's assistant, and now you are rightfully acting as the doctor in this archaic system we've created of the doctor at the top of the structure, when the doctor probably isn't needed at the top except when he or she is needed. Gresh, it's good talking with you, and I'm looking forward to creating an opportunity for everybody to learn not only what you've learned, but you teaching the students so that he, she can be even better than you are right now. And thank you.
Thank you.